Welcome to Terran Apex Protocol, where the galaxy keeps underestimating humanity and keeps regretting it. If these stories are your kind of story, subscribe and stay with us. My name's Atlas. Today's story is about the one weapon in the galaxy that doesn't run on a power cell, doesn't need a targeting computer, and cannot be switched off by any field the Vorath Concord ever invented. Let's begin. The boxes were heavy, and that was fine. Nadia Okonkwo had been moving heavy boxes since she was 7 years old on Heaviside, where the sky pressed down like a hand on the back of your neck, and even small children walked slightly bent at the knee, permanently braced against a gravity that most colonies considered a medical condition. The boxes on the CNS ballast were full of 40mm ordnance casings, and she had stacked 12 of them in the last 4 minutes, and her lower back did not ache because her lower back never ached, and that was the one thing about herself she had never figured out how to be proud of. Heaviside built its children to carry things. The colony had been settled by a generation of miners and terraformers who had not understood what they were agreeing to when they signed the land charter. And by the time they understood, the colony was already 2 generations deep, and the children born there had the dense-boned, thick-shouldered, slightly forward-leaning look of people who had been arguing with gravity their whole lives, and were, on balance, winning. Nadia stood 5'9" by Commonwealth measurement, and had forearms that made the ballast's regular crew briefly reconsider their life choices the first time she shook their hands. She had failed the gunnery board twice. The first time, her hands had shaken on the trigger housing. The second time, her hands had shaken on the trigger housing again, which made it a pattern rather than a bad day, and the board had thanked her for her time and moved on. She was 29 years old. She was the ballast's ordnance handler, and the career note on her personnel file read, "Support, non-combatant, handles materiel." This was accurate and incomplete in the way that most brief summaries are accurate and incomplete. But she had never found the right words to fill the gap, and she had mostly stopped trying. The CNS ballast was an evacuation tender, which was the Commonwealth fleet's polite way of describing a ship with no significant armament that was expected to stay behind better-armed vessels and rely on them. She was built wide and slow for holding refugees, with reinforced lower decks that could carry 1,200 people in reasonable comfort or 3,000, in the kind of comfort that nobody wanted, but everybody chose over the alternative. This particular run was 3,000. The Seether system had been burning for 6 days when the ballast arrived, and the refugees had been loading for 11 hours, and the ship smelled of fear and recycled air, and the particular anxious exhaustion of people who had been told they were safe now, but had not yet decided to believe it. Captain Imra Salko had gotten them off the ground and onto a clean outbound vector inside 2 hours, which was 14 minutes better than doctrine, and a fact he did not mention, because he did not believe in pointing at his own work. He was a careful, quiet man who wore his rank the way a good craftsman wears a tool belt, and his crew moved well for him because he had never once asked them to do something he had not thought through. The vector held for 40 minutes, and then it did not. Sub-Marshal Tov of the Edict of Reach had been watching the ballast's refugee loading operation from the Threx liaison station on the ship's command deck, and he had been filing regular reports that amounted to nothing of tactical interest. The Threx High Echelon had posted him as a liaison officer aboard a human evacuation tender because the Seethar system sat in a shared operational zone, and shared operational zones required liaison officers, and Tov had volunteered because the alternative posting had been even less interesting. He was not a strategic officer. He was adequate at his work, consistent, thorough, and thoroughly unremarkable, and he knew this about himself with the particular clarity of someone who has never found the one thing that would change the equation. He had 6 arms, arranged radially around a torso that was symmetric in every direction a torso could be symmetric, and a dorsal quill fan that spread from the crown of his upper segment down through his mid-section, currently lying flat and gray. Threk's quills were autonomic, responding to neurological load the way a blush responds to embarrassment. And Threks who had mastered their professional presentation learned early to keep the fan low, and still in the presence of species who had no equivalent tell, because giving away your internal states was, in Threk's tactical culture, roughly equivalent to broadcasting your weapon's loadout on an open channel. His quills were flat because there was nothing to raise them. The Vorath Concord's advanced screen was at last sensor contact, approximately 8 light minutes away. The human crew was competent, organized, and not particularly interesting to observe. He had noted the ordnance handler, the large one with the postural irregularity, 3 times in his daily reports, and each time under the same header: support staff, non-combat, no significant tactical assessment. He was watching her now through the command deck viewport, moving crates on the hangar bay floor below. She carried weight in a way he found faintly difficult to look away from, her whole body committed to each load. She leaned into the box and moved continuously, as though there were no separate steps between grasping and arriving. He filed it as postural anomaly, possibly dietary in origin, and turned back to his displays. Then Salko's voice came over the command channel, quiet and factual. The Vorath advanced screen has changed vector. They are in intercept configuration, all hands to stations. Tav's quills shifted 1 centimeter upward, just 1 centimeter. He noted this and pressed them down again. The briefing on Deck 5 took 11 minutes and ended on a sentence that accounted for the silence that followed it. Salko said, "The still field is active," and then he waited while the room processed what that meant. Every officer in that room had grown up with the still field as a fixed fact of the galaxy's military architecture. Nadia had learned its mechanics the first time through the gunnery program, before she had washed out, and the second time, before she had washed out again. The Vorath Concord had deployed the first operational stillfield projector 22 years ago, and the galaxy's strategic calculus had reorganized itself around that technology the way a river reorganizes itself around a new rock in the channel. The stillfield was a suppression field, a bubble of distorted carrier medium roughly 3 kilometers in diameter that moved with the projector ship generating it, and inside that bubble, every guided weapon in existence lost its guidance, and every directed energy beam diffused into harmlessness. Targeting computers became decorative. Seeking shells became inert slugs. The most sophisticated weapons platforms in the known galaxy became approximately as dangerous as very expensive paperweights. What the stillfield left intact was bodies. Whatever bodies happened to be inside the sphere, pressed together at arm's length, and the math that resulted from that press was the same math that had ruled every war before someone invented the gunpowder charge and the beam rifle and the guided missile. The side with more bodies, pressing forward with more mass and more momentum, won. The Vorath Concord had been investing in population growth for 30 years, and their boarding units were trained for exactly this: mass and forward momentum, the grinding patience of a tide. Salko walked them through the tactical picture in 7 sentences. The assault ships were 4. Boarding tubes were extending. The press would begin at their current rate in approximately 9 minutes. The ballast's active defensive systems were now inert. Available crew for corridor defense numbered 81. The lower decks held 3,000 civilians. He did not say anything after that. He did not need to. Nadia looked at Ruben Adeyemi standing to her left. He was a big man, not as big as her but close, with broad hands, and the kind of stillness that comes from having grown up in a place that taught you patience. He had been born on a water world, which had given him a different kind of physical education than Heaviside had given her. And he had been her partner on the ordnance deck for 3 years. And she trusted his judgment the way you trust the judgment of someone who has never once given you a reason not to. He looked back at her. His face was doing the thing it did when he was thinking past the obvious answer to the one behind it. Better than moving boxes, he said. She did not agree with this assessment. She picked up her station assignment and went to work. The first boarding tube locked to the ballast starboard secondary hull at 312 ship time, and the Vorath began to pour through it within 90 seconds. They came in a wedge, 6 in front, then 10, then more, all carrying the wide rectangular impact shields the Vorath boarding units favored, moving forward with the controlled, methodical pace of something that has been trained to be very patient about winning. The second tube locked 4 minutes later. The third and fourth followed within 6 minutes. 81 crew to defend corridors now connected to 4 boarding points, and the corridor teams met the press at the junction of 7 and Cross 9. And it went badly in the specific way that going badly tends to go when the arithmetic is wrong from the start. The first corridor fell in 11 minutes. The teams pulled back and held secondary positions for 9 more. The math was the same both places, buying time without knowing what they were buying it for, because the guns were dead and the guided systems were dead, and the only remaining plan was to put bodies in front of other bodies. Tov had filed the human under support personnel, non-combatant, and would spend the rest of his life amending that single line. Nadia was not in Corridor 7. Her station assignment had put her in the ammunition handling bay off the main hangar deck, 40 meters from where the action was. There were racks of 40mm casings around her, sealed in composite canisters, and there was a hull wrench hanging from the tool rail that was 43 centimeters of hardened composite with a grip just past the head, and she had picked it up without consciously deciding to pick it up. She stood in the middle of the bay with the wrench in her hand and listened to the press, moving through the corridors 3 junctions away, that persistent low percussion of boots and impact shields and human voices telling other human voices to fall back and hold, and fall back again. She was thinking about the thing she always thought about in moments like this, which was the gunnery board, the 2 failures, the shaking hands on the trigger housing, the polite dismissal, the personnel file that read support, non-combatant, handles materiel. Her hands were shaking now. They were always shaking. They shook on gun triggers, and they shook in briefings, and they shook when she was angry or afraid, which she was both of at this moment. But they had never, not once in her life, shaken at the moment of release. On Heaviside, the shake happened before. The release was clean. This was the thing no examiner had ever thought to test, because the Heaviside throw was not in any examiner's manual. Because no one in the history of the Commonwealth's gunnery program had thought to put one there. Then, a Vorath soldier came around the corner of the cross passage, 17 meters away, separated from the press by the angle of the deck. And he saw her, and she saw him, and the wrench left her hand before she had made a choice about it. It was not clean. She was too close, and the angle was wrong, and she had not had time to find the line. But the wrench hit him in the shoulder at the speed of something thrown from a world that did not believe in giving you anything for free, and the impact knocked him hard into the bulkhead, and he went down and did not come up quickly, and Nadia stared at the space where the wrench had been and understood, in a slow, dawning way, what had just happened. She picked up a second wrench. She had an arm. The gunnery board had tested her hands on a trigger and found them wanting, and it had never thought to ask about her shoulder because the shoulder was not a weapon. Not in the weapons registry. Not in any weapons registry in the history of any species the Commonwealth had contact with. Because every species in the galaxy had developed ranged weapons faster than throwing arms had ever needed to matter. Except on Heavyside, where gravity had been a teacher that did not grade on a curve. A still field could stop every weapon in the galaxy's weapons registry. It could not stop something that was not in the registry. She went to find Tov. He was already looking for her. They met at the junction of Cross 7 and the ammunition bay access, and he opened with, "Where are you from originally?" She told him Heaviside, and he ran something on his wrist display for 3 seconds, and his quills went to pale copper. "The gravity differential there is 1.4 standard," he said, in a voice that was not entirely steady. "That's right," she said. He looked at the soldier she had dropped, still slumped at the cross passage entrance, and then at her right arm, and then at something on his wrist display that she could not see. His quills stayed at copper and did not settle. Whatever he had begun to work out, he did not say it aloud, the way a person does not say aloud a number that is too large to be useful yet. "There is something I need to confirm," he said. "Stay alive while I confirm it." "I need to find Reuben," she said. She found Reuben at the crates. She told him what she had worked out, and he listened the way he always listened, completely, not managing the conversation, but receiving it. He looked at the first soldier she had dropped, still sitting against the bulkhead at the cross passage entrance. He looked at the distance. He looked at the wrench in her hand. "What can you reach from here?" he asked. She was thinking in a vocabulary that no tactical doctrine had ever written down, the weight and shape and balance of objects, what carries and what does not, what angle gives you distance. She picked up a bolt from the nearest crate, the hexagonal shaft, 12 centimeters, 500 grams, balanced toward the head. 60 meters if the stance is right, she said, 40 reliably. "The press is at 32 meters from the bay entrance," Reuben said. He had been counting corridors. "So we wait here," she said. "And if it reaches us, I throw things at it." He almost said something about this plan. She could see the thought forming. Then he decided not to say it, which was what she would have decided in his position, because there were no better plans available, and pointing that out served no one. He picked up a bolt from the next crate down, 8 centimeters, shorter and faster. He turned it over twice in his hands. "In case you run out," he said, and put it in his pocket. She almost smiled. She did not quite smile because there was still the press, and there was still the arithmetic. But she was closer to smiling than she had been in several hours. They stayed at the crates for 4 minutes. Around them, the ship talked in its metal language, distant percussion, and the creak of hull plates, and the constant low hum of life support working harder than it liked to. She told him about Heaviside, about the falling rocks, the shale slopes, her first proper throw at age 9, a river stone aimed at a cairn her father had built, 30 meters, dead center, and how her fathers had said nothing but had picked up another stone and handed it to her, and waited. He listened and did not interrupt, and did not offer a similar story, because he knew when someone needed to speak a place into existence rather than share it. Then the press sounds shifted from 3 junctions away to 2, and they looked at each other, and Reuben put the bolt in his pocket and went to hatch 9. She did not follow him. Her station was the ammunition bay. He knew this. She knew this. They both understood that the press was going to reach hatch 9 before it reached the bay, and that someone needed to hold it. He was bigger than her by 30 pounds of solid Waterworld muscle, and he had both his arms at full capacity. She watched him go. Then she went back to the crates and picked up the heaviest wrench on the layout and held it the way she had always held things, with full grip, committed from the fingers through the palm through the wrist. She began working out the line to bay 4 Alpha in her head. 40 meters. The port node housing was reinforced ceramic composite, rated against directed energy weapons up to Class 7. Not rated against anything that was not in the registry. Not rated against a wrench thrown by a shoulder that had grown up under heavy sky. Hatch 9 held for 7 minutes and 12 seconds. The ballast's damage log recorded 4.2 kilonewtons of sustained impact force from the Corridor 5 side, exceeding the hatch's rated capacity by a factor of 1.3. Less than the force Ruben Adeyemi could apply from the inside, braced with both hands and both feet against the opposite wall, for 7 minutes and 12 seconds. He held it alone. There was no one to help him. The corridors on his side of the hatch had been taken by the press, and anyone who tried to reach him would have had to come through those corridors. He knew this, and he held the hatch anyway. "Status," Captain Salkso said into the comm. "Hatch 9 is holding," she said. "I don't know for how long." "Understood," Salko said. She could hear the impact sounds through the hull plating, steady as a clock and wrong as everything. She sorted through the wrenches on the crate top and worked out the geometry of 40 meters. She needed to know the line before the moment came, because at the moment itself there would be only doing. Nadia was at the far end of the bay when the hatch went. She heard it by the sound. The hatch had been making a particular metal groan, punctuated by impacts for 7 minutes, and when it stopped and made a different sound, she knew what the different sound was. She turned. The boarders were coming through the hatch space, still bunched from the corridor side, moving fast and forward. 4 in the first wave, then 2 more behind. They were not looking left because when you break a hatch you move forward, and the left side of the bay was a wall of crates and a human woman they had already assessed as support, non-combatant, no weapons. She had 3 bolts in her left hand and 1 in her right. She got the stance. She planted her right foot, opened her hips, brought her arm back in the full heaviside rotation, the one her body had assembled over 30 years of throwing things on a world that did not consider gravity negotiable. The first throw was clean. The lead boarder took the bolt in the faceplate at 38 meters and sat down hard, and the sound of it was a sharp single crack, nothing like anything in the Vorath boarder's experience of what a human ordnance handler sounded like. They hesitated, just half a second. The second throw pulled left. She had over-rotated the wrist and the bolt hit the doorframe, and the miss went through her like a fault line, the old gunnery shame, the hands that shook. She needed 2 full seconds to set it aside and throw the third. 2 seconds was a long time. The boarders moved. The third bolt hit the second soldier at the collar ring, where the suit sealed, and he stumbled into the 2 behind him, and suddenly there were 4 Vorath boarders, in various states of non-functional and 1 still standing, at 15 meters and closing. She had 1 bolt left. She threw it with everything Heaviside had built into that shoulder over 30 years, and the bolt hit him at the throat, at the joint between helmet and torso plate, and he sat down hard and with no grace, and the bay was clear. Nadia stood in the silence and looked at the hatch. The Vorath had a counter for every weapon the galaxy had ever named. They had never named this one, because no throat in the galaxy had a word for it. Ruben was not there. He had been there, and the hatch had moved, and now he was not there. She knew what this meant. She had known it from the sound, from the 7 minutes, from the arithmetic the stillfield was designed to produce. She stood very still and let it arrive, fully and without deflection. She thought about the bolt in his pocket, the 8-centimeter hex bolt he had picked up in case she ran out. She thought about him turning it over twice, as though it were something he did every day and not the last specific kindness she had accepted from him. The missed second throw was still in her body. She had thrown badly on the second one, and Ruben had held the hatch anyway, and she did not know, and would never know, whether any throw she could have put through that door in those 7 minutes would have changed the math, and the not knowing was the weight that was going to be there for a long time. Submarshal Tov appeared at her left side. His quills were the color of cooling copper, a deep amber red she had no prior reference for, and he was looking at her with the taxonomic precision of his species stripped away. "The hatch is resecured," he said. "The corridor teams have Corridor 5 again." "There is one objective remaining," he said. "The Vorath command shuttle is in Bay 4 Alpha. The Stillfield projector's forward node is on the port strut. If the node is destroyed, the field collapses. The bay is 42 meters across." His quills rose and the copper deepened. "The shuttle's armor is calibrated against every weapon in our arsenal," he said. Every weapon the Concord modeled for. She understood him completely. Bay 4 Alpha had been a forward hangar annex before the ballast started running refugee columns, and now it was full of cots and frightened civilians lying flat. The Vorath command shuttle sat at the far end on extended landing struts, elegant and armored and deeply confident, the way things are confident when they have been designed by people who were very careful about what they needed to account for. It was armored against beams. It was armored against shells. It was armored against guided missiles, against shaped charges, against any ranged weapon that any species in the Concorde's threat registry had ever deployed in a combat theater. The forward node housing on the port strut was separately armored, a secondary fortress inside a larger one. Prime Vorn was not in the shuttle. He was at a secondary command position behind the shuttle's port landing strut, connected to his Stillfield projector network by 3 hardened data lines and 17 years of careful engineering assembled when he was absolutely certain that if you changed the conditions of war, you changed the practice of it. He was not certain of this anymore. The Stillfield had been a pacifist weapon. He had built it to end the orbital strikes that had killed his people for 100 years, the long-distance mass murder that the Concorde's enemies called strategic bombing. His theorem was simple. If no weapon works at distance, war happens only at arm's length, and arm's length is too horrible and too costly to sustain. The Stillfield would end the burning of cities from orbit. He had been wrong about the peace. His elegant theorem had produced 7 years of grinding, bodies-forward attrition, that killed people more slowly than orbital strikes, and no less completely. And he had not found a way to take it back, because you could not uninvent a thing that worked. He watched the bay feeds and told himself that the engagement would end quickly. The math was simple. The Vorath had more bodies. The press was winning. He had told himself this for 7 years. He had never managed to make it feel like anything other than a calculation he ran to avoid the cost column. Then a woman appeared on Bay 4 Alpha's feed. She was walking across the open deck, which caught his attention because no one should have been walking across the open deck, and she was carrying a wrench. His threat assessment flagged her as support, non-combatant, carrying improvised implement, no significant threat, and he was in the process of moving past the alert when she stopped. She stopped at approximately 40 meters from the command shuttle's forward node. She was looking at the node with a specific quality of focus that Vorn recognized, not as rage, not as fear, but as a person looking at a problem they have decided to solve. She shifted her weight. She turned her hips. Her throwing arm came back in a motion that his body could not map onto anything in its physical vocabulary, a rotation around an axis not present in the Vorath physiological library, a winding of shoulder and torso and hip that drew back and did not reach a mechanical limit, and then released. He had time to see the wrench moving. Then it hit the forward node housing, port strut, outer shell, dead center. The node housing was armored against every guided weapon in the Concorde's comprehensive threat registry, which had been updated 17 times in the last 7 years. It had not been updated to account for a wrench thrown by a human hand from a high-gravity colony. She said something as she threw it. He could not hear her at this distance, but he could read the shape of it on the feed. The outer shell cracked. A single hairline fracture, visible on his damaged display, as a structural integrity drop of 11%. She had already picked up the second wrench. The second throw was different from the first. The same rotation but faster, more committed, the way an argument is more committed the second time, because the first time established that arguing works. She threw the second wrench at the same crack, and the crack became a split, and the split became a failure, and the node housing broke open along its welded seam. Vorn sat forward. He had spent his entire professional life building the architecture that kept weapons at distance, and he was watching it fail because a woman from a heavy-gravity colony had a joint his species had never modeled. He ran a threat registry search. The result came back empty because the registry had been compiled from weapons inventories, and what she was doing was not in any weapons inventory, because weapons were things you built, and this was a thing she was born with. There was exactly one thing in the bay the stillfield could not switch off, and it was standing by the ammunition crates with a shaking hand. Nadia's shoulder was already starting to go wrong. She knew it the way you know a sound you have never heard before, but understand immediately as structural, as load-bearing, as the sound that means the margin is gone. She noted it, filed it, and did not stop moving. The circuits inside the node housing were exposed. There was a second node on the starboard strut. The shuttle's pilot was already beginning the reroute that would bring the starboard node online as the primary. She had perhaps 40 seconds. "You build a machine to do it," she said, to the empty air, to the refugees lying flat on their cots, to Reuben who had a bolt in his pocket that he was no longer going to need. "I just grew up somewhere that taught my arm." She threw the third wrench. The shoulder did not give the same warning this time. It gave a different one, deeper and more final, a sound she felt, rather than heard, traveling from the capsule through the clavicle, through the whole left side of her chest. She was on her knees before she registered going down. The wrench was already in the air. It went through the reroute junction housing on the starboard, strut the way a fist goes through a door that was not built to withstand fists. The junction split. The reroute died. Every hardened data line Vorn had run from his secondary station to his projector network now ran to components that were no longer capable of receiving data. The stillfield dropped. Across every corridor and junction and boarding tube of the ballast, across the Allied ships in the engagement zone, across every weapons system that had been sitting powered and patient and completely useless. For the last 40 minutes, the lights came back on. The targeting computers woke. The guided shells found their purpose. The Vorath boarding press, which had been winning by the numbers, discovered what it meant to be inside an enemy ship when the enemy's weapons start working again. The press broke. Nadia was on the deck of Bay 4 Alpha, with her throwing arm held against her chest, and around her the refugees were beginning to sit up and look at each other. And down the corridor, she could hear the press changing from the sound of something winning to the sound of something trying very hard to be somewhere else. Prime Vorn was taken at his secondary command station 3 minutes after the stillfield dropped. He did not resist. He placed his hands in front of him and looked at the bay feed one last time. The woman was still on the deck. 2 crew members were helping her to her feet, and her right arm was hanging in a way that arms are not designed to hang. "We removed every weapon from the field and forgot that one species is the weapon," Vorn said. "We did not know the weapon was the animal." The petty officer told him to be quiet. The node housing had been armored against every guided weapon in the Concorde's registry, updated 17 times across 7 years of war. Nobody armored the cockpit against a wrench. Why would they? He said this without bitterness, which the petty officer noted later in her incident report as strange. It had the exhaustion of a man who had spent 17 years watching a single miscalculation replicate itself across everything he built. Then he allowed himself to be led from the station, and the 3,000 refugees in the lower decks began the slow process of believing they were still alive. The moral was stated once, by the man who had most needed it to be otherwise. Outside the command station, the engagement was over. The Vorath boarding units had withdrawn to their tubes, and the Allied guns had done the rest. The ordnance handler, whose file had read support, non-combatant, handles materiel, for the whole of her career, was sitting on the deck of Bay 4 Alpha with one arm against her chest and the other 6 wrenches on the floor around her. The debrief happened 6 hours later in the medical bay, because that was where Nadia was. 2 surgeons had assessed the shoulder independently and come back with the same numbers, which she took as a sign that what they were delivering required 2 of them. Full function would return, they said, or close enough. She would lift. She would carry. She would move the heavy boxes that no one else wanted to move. The one thing the shoulder would not do again was what it had done on Bay 4 Alpha. The capsule was rebuilt in the way of injuries that are healed but not restored, the architecture altered at the foundational level, and the throw that had lived there for 30 years of heaviside gravity would not live there anymore. She had known it on the 3rd throw, which was why she had thrown it anyway. Sub-Marshal Tav arrived at the end of the debrief and dismissed the remaining officers with a word. He pulled a chair to her bedside and sat, and did not immediately speak, which she had come to understand was a Threx form of consideration. His quills were a deep-settled copper, not the bright shock flare she had seen in the bay, but the denser color of something past surprise and into understanding. He set a data slate on the bed beside her arm. She read the filing header, Threx High Echelon, Operations Intelligence, Classification, New Combat Asset, Category, Biological Kekinetic. She read the body of the filing. It described the bilateral shoulder joint from high-gravity colony origin as a projectile delivery system of Class 4 kinetic potential, undetectable by any version of the still field in operational use, requiring no power source, no guidance system, no targeting computer, and carrying no registry entry in the Vorath Concord's comprehensive threat catalog. At the bottom, in Tav's precise formal script, originating asset is support class, non-combatant. The word non-combatant had been struck through with a single line. She set the slate down. "I'm not a weapon system," she said. "You are the only delivery mechanism the Vorath did not model," Tav said. "In my species' operational language, that is the definition of an asset. The crew have a different name for it," she said. "It started in the mess sometime after the bay. One word at a time, the way crews name things, long arm." The throw through the cockpit at 40 meters had become, in 11 hours of retelling down on the lower decks, a single phrase that fit in one breath. She found she did not mind it the way she had minded support, non-combatant. It was at least a thing she had done, and not a thing she had failed to be. "Long arm," Tav repeated, as though filing it. "The designation is accurate." His quills lifted briefly, not to the shock copper, but to something softer, a color she had not seen on him before. She suspected it was the color he wore when he was saying something he believed rather than something he had verified. "The human who died at Hatch 9, he said. He was also from a heavy gravity colony." "No," she said. "He was from a water world. He was just strong." Tav was quiet for a moment. He looked at the arm in the sling, the right arm, the heavy-side arm, the arm that was now something healed and altered and no longer what it had been. "I see," he said. She looked at the door of the medical bay. Beyond the corridors was a compartment with a flag over it, and she would need to go there when the surgeons released her and find the right words. She did not currently have them. She would find them, because that was what you did. The Vorath Concord's Council of Voices formally shelved the Stillfield Doctrine 11 days after the engagement at Seathar, by unanimous resolution on the grounds that the doctrine created an engagement environment for which no reliable counter existed. The resolution did not name Nadia Okonkwo. It named the threat category, which the drafting committee had titled the Uncontrolled Ballistic Variable after 4 hours of debate, and recommended that all future tactical modeling account for the full physical capabilities of the engaging species, not exclusively the registered weapons inventory. Vorn's name did not appear in it either, because bureaucracies are not good at attribution in the directions that matter. The Human Confederation offered Nadia a gunnery commission 3 days after the ballast returned to Commonwealth space. It was the posting she had failed to earn twice, the one the gunnery board had decided she was not suitable for, and the offer letter noted that the board's assessment criteria were being revised. She read the letter twice. She told them she had boxes to move and a friend to bury, which were both true and were not the whole reason, but were enough of it. 3 weeks after the engagement, a Threx cadet found her in the ballast's cargo bay. He was young, with the tight, compact quills of someone who had not yet decided what to be startled by, and he spoke Standard with the specific, careful quality of someone who had studied it from recordings rather than from living speakers. He asked, formally and with a slight bow of his upper segment, whether she would be willing to teach him to throw in the way she had thrown in Bay 4 Alpha. Nadia set down the crate she was carrying. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at his 6 arms, arranged in their radial configuration, articulating from the center outward with perfect symmetry, none of them connected to anything that functioned as a ball-and-socked joint. "You can't learn it," she said. "Not any Threx. You would have to be born under heavy sky. Your whole body would have to spend its developmental years arguing with a gravity well that doesn't believe in giving you anything for free. You would need 30 years of carrying things that weighed more than they should, of your shoulder learning to find the line through mass and resistance, and the specific unhelpful physics of a world that made everything harder on purpose. Your people didn't evolve the socket," she said. "My planet built me this way, and then I spent it all in one afternoon, so there you go. But I'll show you how to aim," she said. "The aim isn't in the shoulder. The aim is in something earlier, the decision to commit to the line before the throw happens, the willingness to send what you're holding to the place you've decided it's going, without second-guessing the angle at release." She picked up a bolt from the nearest open crate with her left hand, the working hand now, the hand she was learning to rely on. She held it at the balance point and looked down the length of the bay, and she showed him what she meant about the line and the release point, and the moment where the aim becomes the throw, and the throw becomes the fact of the thing having traveled. "I don't aim with a sight," she said. "I aim with 40 years of falling rocks." The cadet was very still. His quills had gone full pale gold, and she thought that whatever the color meant, it meant something close to what she felt when she thought about Heaviside, about the weight of the sky and the arm it had built her over 30 years, and the afternoon she had spent it in. She set the bolt back in the crate. She picked up the next crate, the one-armed way, the new way, braced and balanced and workable. She had boxes to move, and the shoulder would move them, and the arm that had grown up under heavy sky was gone in the specific way of things that have been used for exactly what they were made for, which is not the same as being lost, and she knew this, and it helped, and it was not enough, and it would have to be. Outside the ballast's hull, the Seathar system was quiet in the particular way that recently contested systems are quiet, the absence of ongoing conflict wearing the surface features of peace without quite being it yet. The doctrine writers of 6 species were opening their threat modeling software and adding a new category that had previously been too obvious to include and too unimaginable to conceive of. The category had no formal name yet in any official document. The crew of the Ballast had already settled theirs, the word that had started in the mess the night of the engagement, and had since traveled the corridors and the supply manifests and, eventually, a Threx intelligence filing until it stuck. Long arm. Somewhere in the fleet, a Threx cadet was standing in a maintenance bay with his 6 arms in their rest configuration, trying to understand the geometry of a joint he did not have, and learning what it meant to commit to a line before you knew for certain the line was right.